You're here. We are about to dive into the science of happiness in the Beyond Performance series with a good friend of mine now, Dan Lerner. I actually just met Dan about last year through one of my partner, Bill Powell. And what an amazing journey it's been to get to know you, Dan, and to hear your research and your science you're working on. Dan is actually a professor at NYU. I think you have like the most popular class, or at least highest rated class at NYU.
We have the biggest class. We have about 1,000 students a year. Yeah,
that's amazing, absolutely amazing. So we're going to dive into that in just a minute. But before we do, let's go through some of these. We're super happy you're here. For those of you who are new, because I see some new names on here, and that's really exciting for us. What is Black Lab, and what are we doing here? Like, why are we even doing this? So our purpose here at Black Lab is to unleash greatness, and specifically your greatness, and to unlock the potential of the people and the businesses doing in our community. So that's literally what we're up to doing. Our mission is to inspire, to activate, and hyper-enable you, our thinker-doers, to propel humanity forward. Now, it sounds like a big task, but that's kind of, given the world today, given the events, given the stuff around us, it takes communities like this, from scientists and artists, professors to entrepreneurs, investors, to scientists, to researchers, to come together, work on really hard problems, and really propel humanity forward. So out of this today, here's the goal. The goal is that you're going to find meaningful relationships and connections that eventually transform into meaningful work. And so if you're a scientist or researcher, you may be looking for a funder or a partner or another company to partner with. If you're an entrepreneur, you might be looking for other entrepreneurs to hire or to bring onto the team, co-founders, new ideas, or you may be an investor. If you're an artist, you might be looking for that community to build upon. So really look out. And in one sense, I always say this, think about what you can offer to the people that you're about to meet, and be giving, give first on that. So our event tonight, it's 2 hours long. We've got an amazing speaker. We're going to have 2 breakout sessions. Well, actually, we'll have 3. It's like 2.5. And so that's what you're in for. And we're super excited about it. Before I get going, though, I want to introduce my co-host, Cody Burkhart, out of Houston, Texas. Cody, you want to introduce yourself real quick and maybe give us what happened last month?
Yeah, thanks to everyone. I'm always excited to have these conversations and be a part of these events. My background is I work at NASA. I run a human performance lab that specializes in physiology sensing techniques, and we try and design technologies for humans and crew. And so the part that we had last week was really, one of those, I'll say, topics that hits close to home. Part of what I'm going from an educational standpoint right now is neuroscience and behavior. And so getting into the conversation of fear that we had last month was really exciting, right? It was a different way of talking about it. You're very used to hearing it from a conditioned perspective, how it gets classically conditioned and what kind of conditioned response we get out of something. But in the conversations that we had with Kristen, right, she was talking about, how do you feel pain? How can you localize it? How can you then identify it in your life? And then also, how does that relationship of fear and anxiety kind of co-locate together? And we also kind of dove into, I think, a very different strategy for approaching fear, right? She talked about not wanting to fear shame people and trying to develop this better, stronger relationship with fear. And then on the flip side, right, Alex comes in from a very, very specific background from a military operator standpoint and seeing fear in some really unique perspectives. And I encourage those of you who haven't seen it to go check out the video and hear about the pink elephant that he talks about and what that really means. And it's one of those kind of cool things to kind of check into if you haven't seen it. So last month, again, was really cool, deep dive into fear. And it's a perfect kind of antithesis to this next conversation about happiness that we're having.
Yeah, and so if you think about the series, we're looking at these problems that we as humans individually and as society, as family, as units, as teams, as even kind of a nation or even a species are existing. So fear is one of them. Obviously, this positive psychology or happiness, the other side of that is one of them. We're going to talk about values next month, and then we're even going to go into sleep and some of these other things. So join us for this whole year around this Beyond Performance series, this idea of human well-being. But yeah, that was a great one last month. So if you missed it, make sure you take a look. So what's next? We are trying something new this month. And if it blows up, because technology sometimes does, we're going to move on. What I want you to do is take your phone, go ahead and hit this QR code. This is going to launch you into a wallet. This is a company that we're partnering with called Vatum, and they're basically a Web 3.0 company. And we want, if you're not used to or not into Web 3.0, or if you're not doing NFTs yet, we wanted to give you a first taste into it. So all you need to do is put your email, your phone number in there, and then go ahead and sign up. On the next page, it's going to ask you for your name and then your email address. I would skip the email address right now because it requires some kind of other setups and things like that. Let's just take the simplest part. So again, scan this with your phone. The way you do that is with your camera of your phone. You just put your camera up to the screen. The QR code should highlight. You touch the screen, it'll load up this web page. Type in your phone number, hit send magic link. That should give you a 4-digit number. That will actually create your account for you. And if anyone has it breaks it, or don't worry about it. This is all pretty new technology, but we wanted to give you a chance to start this way. We're actually on the next page, we're going to give you a present, our very first NFT, and maybe perhaps even yours. All right. Everyone good? All right. So, hey, congratulations. Who raise your hand. By the way, down below, you can use these tools like reactions. Raise your hand. This is your very first NFT. I'm just curious. A couple of you. All right, great. There you go. Excellent, excellent. So, hey, now you are in. When someone says, what is this Web 3.0 and what is this NFT thing? You can say, that's old stuff. I already got mine. If you stay to the end, we're actually going to give you another surprise one that you can also collect. It'll be as easy as another camera capture. All right, let's move on. So we use Zoom pretty fully. What we're going to do now is we're going to break you out into these Zoom breakouts. And so these are groups of usually 3, maybe 4 people. It's self-moderated. And this is kind of a practice. You're only going to get a minute each to introduce yourself. So it's going to be 3 minutes on the clock. Each of you, I want you to say who you are, where you're from, why you're here. And it'll be basically that short, but get to see another person, say hello. And then what we're going to do is we're going to throw you into these rooms. And then when those 3 minutes are back, we're going to pull you all back in. And this is where you can kind of experience that. Emily, you ready to go? All right. Okay, so welcome back. So hopefully that you get used to that. We're going to have 2 more of those breakout sessions. And we'll give you a prompt where you spend a lot more time than just 3 minutes with each other. Again, an opportunity to meet someone, build those relationships, and hopefully find some meaningful work. So I'm really excited. We're going to go ahead and share the screen again here. I really want to jump directly into this content with our speaker today. Dan Lerner, like I said, has become a good friend. He's he's a performance coach. He's one of the top professors at NYU. He's got the top course there. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time introducing him other than the work that we've done with the community. And Dan has been kind of really helping to think about and synergize how to put models together around some of this pretty complex information. He's been an amazing steward. So Dan, thanks for being here. And why don't you take it over?
As JP mentioned, and by the way, JP, thanks for that very generous introduction. I am right there with you. We met through Bill. It's been such a pleasure, and I still look forward to what we're going to get a chance to do together as colleagues, but also as friends. So as he mentioned, I've been teaching this course at NYU for the last 10 years. It's a course called The Science of Happiness. And in that course, we cover lots of different topics, ranging from positive emotions to willpower, to choice, mental health challenges, the role of the body in well-being, lots of different things. And that course, as you may know, if you either have a child who is in college or is in high school or have a child, period, it is getting increasingly challenging to keep people engaged. So one of the things we do, in part for that reason, in part because we really think it's essential, is something that I want to do tonight as well. And that's not just to talk at you for the next couple of hours, other than the breakouts, you'll talk and speak with each other, but also to make sure there's a healthy amount of interaction. I am going to ask questions throughout, and I'd love to hear your responses. Sometimes there'll be hands raised. Sometimes they'll require some unmute action, but being able to have that interaction is really key. So, and along with that, by the way, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will keep one eye on that chat. If I can get to them in the moment, I certainly will. If they're relevant at that very time, I will. And if they're coming down the line, I'll certainly note that. If we don't get to it, then let's see if we can get to them. We'll sort of collect them. Emily maybe can collect them, and we can talk about them a little later on in the session. So let me begin with a question then, and it's not a difficult question. In fact, it's one of the easier questions that one could ask. I know we've all been working hard all week. It's Wednesday night. I'm not going to challenge you too much, and that's really simple. I mean, how many people here are interested in that concept of success? I mean, for yourselves, for your family, for your businesses, the whole thing. If you want to go ahead and put your hand up in some way, or just actually even better, if you want to put it in the chat, just I am, a me, something like that. That is always so welcome. I am, me. Thank you for the all caps, Brian Rogers, and thank you for the YEEP, Bill. Yeah, so lots of different forms of success. And we're going to talk about that, by the way. I know that's a tricky question because how are we defining success? We're going to answer that question at some point tonight as well. So perfect. Let me ask you the only question I can think of that is probably easier than that. And that's, who's interested in happiness? Either the science of, the practice of, the achievement of, for yourselves, for your family, for your organizations. Go ahead, hit me, throw it out there. For sure, yes. Happiness even more success. Matthew, I am with you, and then you sort of you gave us a hint at where we're going with this. Bobby's in. Joy, even. We will talk about joy, Wesley. Yes, yup, Bridget, thank you. Terrific. This is all great. Thanks, John. So here are two topics that most people tend to be interested in. Not a surprise. The challenge here is that they don't always go together as often as we'd like, and they rarely go together the way that we expect. So let me share a story to illustrate this before we really get into the meat of this of the session. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was sitting in my living room in New York City. It was a Saturday night, and I had been really looking forward to this Saturday night for weeks, if not months. Not just because I'd been traveling or because I had been working a lot. I mean, both things that were happening, but we all do those things with probably too much frequency. But it was because my wife and I had been watching Breaking Bad, and we were down to the last 3 episodes of the series. And if you've seen Breaking Bad, or if you have a favorite series, you know what that's all about. So we were ready. Our little boy was in bed. I had a bowl of popcorn in front of us, a bottle of wine that was open, sitting on the couch. I literally had my hand on the Apple TV remote ready to hit play when my phone rang. And I looked down, and it was on the coffee table, where it shouldn't be on a Saturday night when you're about to watch something with your partner. And it said no caller ID. Now, we all know what we do when we get a call that lists as no caller ID. We let it go to voicemail, unless of course you're single, which I wasn't. So, for some reason, I still decided to pick it up and answer the phone. I said hello, and the voice on the other end of the line came shooting out like it had been blown out of a cannon. It said, "Hi, you don't know me. My name is John Doe." To be very clear, this person's name was not John Doe. That would have been a little creepy. But I did know him. In fact, many of us here would know him because John Doe, as we're calling him, is one of the best-known musicians in his field. And I was a little taken aback. I didn't know if it was true or not. But before I could say much more, he just kept going. He said, "Look, ever since I started in this business, I have known what it looks like to be successful. I've had an image in my head. And when I first started practicing, when I first went to teachers, when I first started making music with other people, I had this image in my head. When I got my first agent, I told them what it was. My first manager, I told them what it was. My second agent, I told them what it was. And I've been working incredibly hard all this time. And I've always known, because there was a picture of it on his parents' refrigerator, that I would be successful when I was doing a solo performance at Carnegie Hall. And now it's happening. And at this point, I know it's him. I recognize this voice. And all I could really manage was, congratulations. When's it happening? He said, "No, you don't understand. It's happening right now." And I looked at my watch. I was like, it's just after 9, Saturday night. I said, "Are you calling me from intermission?" He said, "Yes, I just finished the first half. I walked off. I told my manager, exactly what I just told you. And I told him what I'm going to tell you next, which is that I'm miserable. I have worked incredibly hard for this goal. I have sacrificed. I have done things that I didn't think I was capable of doing, both in good and bad ways. And I'm here and I'm a miserable partner. I'm a miserable parent. I don't like playing music anymore. I'm a miserable human being. So where did I go wrong? And what do I do next? Now, I will share with you what we did next a little later on. But the point here is that a lot of the ways that we think about success, the ways that we predict success down the line, the way we think about the future, the way that we believe happiness will come to us in its relationship to success, well, they're flawed, like seriously flawed. So tonight I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about why we think about them the way we do. I want to talk about why our thinking in that way is flawed. And I really want to talk about the relationship between success and happiness as we find it in the research over the past 15, 20 years, but also in the actions that we can take that we find that actually can raise our levels of happiness while we're striving for a measurement of success. Now, I've been fascinated by this relationship for pretty much as long as I can remember. I grew up in a happy home. My parents were both professional musicians. My father was in the Pittsburgh Symphony. My mom was an opera singer who would sing around the world. And what I remember from being very young was watching them play in the living room and thinking, they're really happy. Of course they're happy. I mean, they're successful at what they do. I was young, but I had seen the crowds and I'd heard the applause. And I thought, well, why wouldn't they be happy? They're successful. So for years, that was kind of the way I thought about the relationship between happiness and success. When I am able to be successful in whatever it is I'm striving for, that is when I will be happy. And this went on for about 18 years until I graduated from college and I started my first job. And that was as an agent for classical musicians, mostly opera singers, conductors, directors. Technically, my first job was as an assistant. Well, an assistant to an assistant. But I remember seeing a lot of folks who were like my parents. They were successful or more successful in what they were doing, naming lights, making really good money, very prestigious stuff, and making music. And they were seemingly very fulfilled people. They had time with their family. They had hobbies. They were doing things in their life that were important as well as their work. But I also saw another group that I really hadn't seen before. And that was these folks who were just as successful, if not more successful, naming lights, playing all the big, great theaters around the world, praise, money, the whole thing. But they were not happy. I would get phone calls at 2 a.m. With someone in tears saying, I haven't seen my family for months, or I don't have a family, or I have nothing else in my life. Not like the fellow from Carnegie Hall, I'm a miserable person. And I saw this for long enough over the course of my 10 years in that business that I finally left. I left and I wanted to answer one very specific question. And that was this: when do success and happiness coexist? So first, I looked into the success bit. I ended up studying, I should say, at what's called the Center for Enhanced Performance. It is a unit at West Point Military Academy, where it's basically a huge group of sports psychologists and performance psychologists. So performance psychology being the science of how we improve, how we get better at things, and also how do we perform at our peak when stress is high, right? And that was a remarkable experience, but it still wasn't the complete experience. I need to understand happiness. And so there were a couple books on the syllabus there that really drew me. One, and you may be familiar with them. One is called Learned Optimism by a man named Martin Seligman. And it's like the father of positive psychology, as we call him. And the other is called Flow by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. First is clearly about optimism. The latter is about deep engagement, sort of flow being when we lose ourselves in an activity. If you've ever been doing something, reading, playing tennis, cooking, gardening, anything, where you go, oh my gosh, where'd those last 2 hours go? I have no idea. Everything sort of disappeared. That's flow. So I followed Seligman. I went to University of Pennsylvania to study under him, and that was positive psychology. And now we're talking about the science of positive emotions and the science of relationships, positive relationships, and the science of meaning and the science of purpose and the science of passion. And what struck me as I was immersed in this with this question was that it wasn't just my performers, my singers, the clients I used to work with. It was folks across the board. First thing that became incredibly clear to me, and I think is clear to a lot of folks here, is that we have exemplars of both of these sides very much in our everyday view. We can look at two people who work in the same industry or similar industries, someone like Steve Jobs, for example. Truly excellent at what he does. No question, he is successful at what he does. Changed the way we think, the way that we communicate. Too many things to list there, and built one of the great companies in history. But was he a happy person? I'm not going to say he was or he wasn't, but a lot of the signs would lean towards no, he was not a particularly happy person. Successful, yes. Happy, questionable. But we can also think about someone like Richard Branson, the founder and CEO of Virgin Industries, Virgin Records, Virgin Airlines, Virgin Hotels. And here's someone who's always said the reason I'm successful is because I make time for my family, because I do the things I love, because I have hobbies, because I spend time with friends. So we can look at two people who are both very successful entrepreneurs and CEOs and see that while they're both very successful, one might be considerably more happy than the other. Now, looking at the demographic here, I know we had a fair amount of artists, for example. We can look at it across the board. We can look at someone like Kanye West. Now, we have to factor in mental illness, which, again, I'm not going to diagnose, but he is talked about, and that is certainly a consideration. But here's someone who is as successful in their business as anyone, right? As a producer, as a rapper, as an entrepreneur, so on and so forth. Is he a happy guy? Again, I can say I have my doubts, and I think a lot of us might. He's been quite open about that. But we can also look at someone in that field like the late, great Maya Angelou, the former poet laureate, a champion of women's rights and civil rights. And here's a woman who did not grow up with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was a child orphan, child pimp, child prostitute, who was beaten, abused, and would come up to be this extraordinary presence. And she has always said the reason she was able to get to where she is because of the people around her, because of the positive, the loving relationships, the caring relationships she had around her. So again, we have someone who is in that field. And if you want to look at it quantifiably, we can look at sport. I love sport because you can look at the numbers and they speak for themselves. And I tend to think about Bob Knight. And if you're not familiar with who Bob Knight is, he's the former head coach of University of Indiana men's basketball. He won a national championship, the pinnacle for that position, national championship for Division I basketball. And after many allegations of verbal abuse, he was fired after being caught on camera with his hands wrapped around the neck of one of his players during practice. So successful from a win perspective, yes. He wrote a book called The Power of Negative Thinking, by the way. So I think that might shine a light into the way that he coached. But you can look at Mike Szyszewski, the soon-to-be retired coach of Duke Blue Devils, Duke University men's basketball, 5 national championships, 3 Olympic gold medals as head coach, gives back to his community, very involved not-for-profits around the city, very involved with his players, and has said, I don't want my players to be stressed. They play better when they're not. He, one season, had them all each have a basketball that was signed by people to whom they were grateful, and keep that basketball with them the whole year. So it's a very different life. And again, very successful. And by the way, this movement towards positive coaching is relatively new. There's been a lot coming out about the Rams head coach, Sean McVay, just won the Super Bowl, how positive he is with his players. But what's interesting for me about Knight and Szyszewski is that Bob Knight was Mike Szyszewski's head coach in college at West Point. So the apple can fall far from the tree, right? So if you didn't grow up under, or you didn't have a mentor or a leader who brought these positive attributes to their style, it doesn't mean that you can't. Now, look, if we're not shooting to be a D1 basketball coach or or a hip hop mogul. How else does this work for us, right? Now, this is where some of the data starts to get really interesting. So if we look at traditional measurements of success in our culture, we find an interesting correlation, right? Could this be a real picture of a lawyer? I mean, what do you think? Right? Throw in the chat if you want to. I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and put it out there that it could, right? I mean, I got it as clip art off the internet, but it could, because only lawyers would really hold their money like Wild West gangsters, right? But lawyers also make enough money to tuck it under their arms in those big bags, right? In fact, lawyers are the number one highest earners in the white collar strata. Not a bad thing. And a strong mark of success in our culture, right? Lawyers are actually number one in a number of different things. They're number one in nicotine abuse. They're number one in alcohol abuse. And they're number one in depression. So a lot of things we don't want to be number one in. In fact, lawyers, after a decade, about 25% quit practicing law. Right. So all these years in school and they're gone. By the way, I once showed this slide to a group of lawyers, 600 of them, at a conference I was speaking at, and it was like dead silent until someone piped up in the back and said, does this explain why I'm such a beep? I won't share the word. And I was like, sir, I don't know. It might contribute to why you're such a beep, but I'm going to leave that one up to you. Right. So here we have a traditional measurement, but it correlates with something that we really don't want. Now, maybe it's lawyers. I mean, there are jokes about lawyers and they get a tough rap a lot of the time. So let's look at somebody else for a second. Maybe someone who has for the most part, more respected position. Could this be a real picture of a doctor? And again, it could be, right? I got it off clip art, but it could be, because doctors actually have 187,876 reasons to be happy. But are they? And given where I've already gone with this, what I'm going to say next. And the answer is no. This, by the way, was a poll of 20,000 doctors in North America back in 2014. Turns out that 40% would have chosen a different career if they got a chance to do it all over again. Right. By the way, thank you, Laura, for contributing. The pressure's real. Yeah. Who's an attorney. Right. And they're dealing with people who are fighting all the time. Just to go back to that slide for Barbara's mention, and lawyers tend to perpetuate that. Nope, not sorry to stereotype. In fact, just to riff on that for a second, Barbara, Yale School of Law had a study that came out about 7 or 8 years ago. And they found that lawyers are on average about 3.4 times more depressed than your average American. And in part, that was due to the fact that they are trained to argue. They are trained to find flaws in other people's arguments, in addition to all the hours they work. And there's a lot of pressure, but they're trained to do these things. So as a tangent for a second, some of the things that came out of that study included children of lawyers saying, I feel like I'm being deposed at the dinner table. You said that you'd be home at 10:30. You left Mary's house at 10. We know it's 10 minutes away. Where were you for the extra 20 minutes? Right? Or lawyers saying they're sitting at their dinner table thinking, I could be billing this right now. And if I were only working. So they're so ingrained that it really affects the way that they see the world, right? With doctors, here we are being able to give back, and yet 40% would have chosen a different career, right? 60% would not recommend the career to somebody else. And I think maybe most damningly, only 6% have positive morale a majority of the time. Now, when it comes to doctors, we looked at the 25% after a decade. Here, what we find in this study of all these tens of thousands of doctors is that 50% are always or often experiencing burnout. It's a big, big number, right? And that's a long time to be experiencing burnout, and a long time to go to school, to go into an occupation where you are clearly not particularly happy, right? As Craig points out, all data gets dated. Right. And this is 2014 study. You're right. What is it now? It's a great question. It will be fascinating to see, Now, let's look at one more here. Could this be a picture of an array of folks who are in the arts, who are elite athletes or coaches, who are involved in engineering, who are CEOs or entrepreneurs? Right. There's no picture. And I don't need a picture, because we talk about all of you here because we've looked at research across the board, and we find that overwhelmingly the folks that are striving for the traditional measurements of success the money, the titles, the promotions, so on and so forth, they tends to correlate directly with the highest levels of depression, the highest levels of stress, and the highest levels of anxiety. So let me ask you all a quick question here. I'm curious, who here has ever gotten either a raise or a promotion at some point during their career? You throw it in the chat, just a quick me, I have kind of thing. And actually, as you're doing it, let me rephrase. When you got that promotion or when you got that raise, how did it feel when you got it? I'd love to hear just one or two words from each person about what they're feeling immediately, right? Respected, right? You get a raise. What do you feel? You get recognized. Perfect, G. That's right. Yes, it felt good. Of course, it felt good, Rolf. I mean, that's we feel recognized and respected with there again, Laura, with that word. Felt great, right? Ooh, for a hot second. Confident, fleeting. We're going to get to that, Greg, and you're right there. Acknowledged, rewarded, right? But in the moment, it wasn't yet fleeting, right? You felt appreciated. So when we've gotten these things, and look, if you've never gotten a raise or you've never gotten a promotion, think about when you got a new car or when you got your first house or when you got something, you were like, look what I just bought, right? This is it, validated, right? So here's the second question. And the second question is, how did you feel about it 3 months later? Someone already mentioned fleeting before. Meh. There it is. How else? 3 months later, after time for another one. Yeah, exactly. It's moved on. It's like it was a trick. Right? Is it really worth it? I'm still here doing this. I had a couple of zeros. Yeah, that's right. I should have asked for more. Right? So we feel validated or needed more, validated or respected at the moment. But yeah, now I'm overwhelmed. Right? This is a lot of pressure. There's even more that I have to do to show them that I've earned this money. And is this really the right way to go? Some people were still happy. Right? So it really depends on your situation, but overwhelmingly, we find in the research is that people feel exactly the same 3 months after they did it. In academia, there's Dan Gilbert, one of my favorite researchers in psychology, did a study of academics who received tenure. They predicted that 3 months after they received tenure, they would feel markedly better. And it turned out that overwhelmingly, they either felt the same as they had pre-tenure or worse, right? So we see it pretty consistently. We see it in sports too, how a fan will feel after a big win, right? They say they feel great, and they do. But 3 months later, meh, next season's rolling around. We got a lot to prove. So the challenge, one of the big challenges here is that it seems like the things we're striving for are the things that are kind of starting to that dissipate rather quickly. Now, if that's the case, what are we supposed to do? And for that, let's look back to our lawyers and our doctors, because there are lawyers and doctors who are doing well, only they're doing things that are a little different, right? When researchers at Florida State looked at lawyers who had higher levels of well-being than the others, it turned out that they were very involved with purpose and meaning. Right? They said that the people they were representing, they felt good about those people. They felt that they were adding something to the world. They were doing something good for other people, that the case could help either the world or the people that this client of theirs would touch. And all of a sudden, you have lawyers who are experiencing something very different than the others. With the doctors, with 6% positive morale, it turned out that those doctors in the same poll who were doing far better overall were the ones who were spending just an additional 2 or 3 minutes with their patients. So all of a sudden, their patients were no longer numbers. They were human beings. Right? And what we're talking about there is relationships, right? I'm giving you a definition here. We'll talk about that in a second. But now we're talking about a very different thing. By the way, it didn't mean they were happier. It meant that they were feeling more fulfilled in their lives. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Now, a far better measure of retention in the workplace than happiness, which is not a very good measure of retention in the workplace, is engagement in the workplace. Right? When people feel like they're engaged at work, as I mentioned, flow, they lose track of time. They're deeply immersed. They're really interested in what they do. They're far more likely to stay with that company, and they're far more likely to report greater overall well-being, not only in their lives at work, but also in their lives at home. Now, something we haven't touched on, but I'm sure for a lot of folks you'll recognize this, is the physical, right? So we find this to be extraordinarily important too. How are we taking care of ourselves? Are we tired all the time? Are we feeling out of shape? Do we feel like we're not eating well? Are we taking care of our bodies, right? That's a huge measure. And if we're not feeling that way, we're far more likely to not feel like we have overall well-being. And finally, of course, emotions, right? I can't leave emotions out of this. Happiness is going to be really, really important. And by the way, I want to point out here, and we're going to dive into this a bit more in a second, it's not just about feeling happier, it's also about being able to deal with the challenging emotions, right? I'm not Mr. Happiness here. I don't teach a course only on happiness. It's also the obstacles, because we will face times that are really hard, like a lot of us have considerably over the past couple of months. Now, what we're looking at here is an acronym. The acronym is for S.P.I.R.E. S.P.I.R.E is a model that's created by Tal Ben-Shahar. Ben-Shahar was a professor, the first professor for the happiness class at Harvard about 20 years ago, and has since then gone on to teach around the world, write a number of books, do a ton of research. And this is his matrix for well-being. Now, when I bring this up in class, I tell the students basically that I've lied to them. And I tell them this on the third class of the semester, just before the add drop period, should they feel the need to do so. But what I tell them is that this course is called The Science of Happiness, but it shouldn't be. It should be called The Science of Well-Being. But if it was called The Science of Well-Being, we would have 5 students in that classroom instead of 500 students in that classroom. So we kind of sucker them into this. But this is the foundation for not only their semester, but increasingly as the research emerges, it's a really strong foundation for many, many, many people in the world. Now, I want you to think about each of these elements of S.P.I.R.E like buckets. So if we're pursuing one of these things, right, the physical, for example, we're just working out and eating well and getting enough sleep, the whole thing. If we don't have anything in our life that allows us to feel like we're happy, aside from the workouts, or if we don't feel like we have purpose in the world, we're just super fit, it's really hard to be happy. If we feel like we're stretching and growing intellectually, like we're challenging ourselves, we're learning things, we're engaged, but if we have no one to turn to and share it with, i.e. the relational, it's really hard to be thriving in life. So when you think about them like buckets, it's not like they all have to be full, but rather what we see in the research is that the people who tend to be thriving in life, who tend to have the greatest levels of well-being, have at least a drop in each bucket. It doesn't have to be overflowing, like I said, and this is really helpful for a number of reasons. In part because it takes the pressure off, right? I don't have to be happy all the time, right? I don't always have to feel like I have purpose and meaning. I don't always have to, eat just right, right? But also because it allows us to craft our own matrix in a way, our own, let's call it a mixing board, to use a musical analogy of well-being. So for Zach, it might be the relational. Zach might be all about his friends. Like that's huge for him. Of course, Zach also values purpose and meaning, but relationships are really key for him. And meanwhile, for Uma, it might be the opposite, right? Super meaningful work, super meaningful pursuit in some capacity, whether it's spiritual or communal. But for her, relationships they're still important, but they're not at the same level. And this is important too, because as times change and as the environment changes, so too will these things. As we know from COVID, we didn't have a whole lot of opportunity, at least it was more challenging to have those relationships, right? It was more challenging for us to find happiness in the emotional. So we were able to turn hopefully to other things. And some of us found the ability to just work out really hard at home and be able to learn something new, to play guitar, something like that, right? For purpose and meaning, we were able to, we define meaning as a connection to something larger than yourself. Even it was just helping an elderly neighbor. Hey, I'm going to go shopping and brave the whole thing. Can I pick something up for you, right? It allows us to know that we're exercising something meaningful to us. So no matter what's happening in our lives, we can use these things to get a better sense of where we are and also to elevate our levels of well-being. Now, I do want to be clear about something here. Now, in emotional, it talks about cultivating resilience to painful emotions. JP and I were talking earlier today about that horrible war that's going on right now in Ukraine, and whether or not there was a place for what we're talking about right now for those people who are suffering over there. And my instant reaction, which was way overgeneralized, was no, there isn't. And of course there is, right? People can find purpose and meaning. It's how they are steeling themselves right now. They're cultivating resilience, right? Which is how they're steeling themselves right now. But in a lot of cases, whether someone is dealing with crippling poverty, lack of freedom, a war type environment, it's really hard to do these things. So I do want to be real clear that's the case. But each of these things adds to what it is we're able to do when we are free, and we're able to know there's a roof over my head, I have a meal tonight, and I'm going to be okay, even if we're struggling in other areas. So this is a lot to take in. And one of the things I would love to be able to do is have you all talk about it a little bit, right? Think about what it is that catches your attention here. For some of you, you might be thinking, I'm actually a really happy person. That's going really well. I would love to find work that has more purpose and meaning. Or you're thinking, I'm deeply engaged in what it is I do. I'm not seeing enough people, right? What is it that really matters to you right now? So we want to jump into another breakout session for that and ask a couple of questions of the folks in your breakout room. Which category of S.P.I.R.E do you think is most relevant for you, and why? Like I said, it's going to be different for everybody, and the why is really important, right? I mean, I might find meaning important for a very, very different reason than Gunther does. I might find relationships in a very different way than Lauren does. But what is it that really stands out for you, and why does it stand out? And also, I think key to this, especially given what's been going on as we reflect on the last 2 years, but also as we'll talk about afterwards, as we look to the future, how has it changed? If the category of S.P.I.R.E for you is spirituality, purpose, and meaning, which doesn't have to be associated with religiosity, how has that changed over the last couple of years for you? Because the odds are is that it has. So let's take 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions before we jump in there, please, by all means.
So what we're going to do, thanks, Dan. So what we'll do is Emily's about to send us away, not yet. Same thing. We're going to send you off to a breakout room. Just for those who have their videos off, this is a great time to pop them back on. Make sure the mic's working. 15 minutes. Hey, well, welcome back, everybody. I think everyone's back, just about. Yep. All right. Magic of breakout rooms and Zoom. So this is a chance now. What we love to do, this is kind of part of the in and out. We call this the accordion style. So you had a chance to discuss. We'd love for you to come back and to share back. What did you learn? What did you learn about yourself? What did you hear? Who wants to go first?
By the way, JP, we do have that poll. We can get a sense.
Let's do that first, actually. Good idea.
Real quick?
Emily, you want to throw that up?
Yeah.
Yep.
So Dan, go ahead, lead us into this poll.
So we're going to put a poll up there just to get a sense of what aspect of S.P.I.R.E you chose. Which one did you choose that really stood out for you, that's most relevant for you right now, that you ended up discussing? We just want to get a sense of where people are. And, as you're taking this, sort of mention that, for example, during COVID, pre-COVID, relationships were on top when you looked at this, relational stuff. During COVID, the folks who were most resilient, it was about spiritual. And again, not necessarily religiosity, but just meaning, knowing that they were connected to something larger than themselves. That's what equated to resilience. So things have changed considerably over the past couple of years, and we'll talk about that. But for you, what was number one?
Right, we're about 80% there. You want to go ahead and share those? There it is. Not surprising, I guess.
Yeah, that tends to be it. All right, thank you. JP, please go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, so let's just dive in. I mean, this is a chance for the first brave person to step up and share. What did you hear? What came up for you in your group? Greg, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, JP. I think, I don't think it was one particular thing, because I think we were all speaking about all five. Because, when you've gone on this journey and we've all learned, I think there's a little bit of there's interconnectedness between it all. We spoke a lot about coming from different cultures and how that had an impact on, us coming here. The two of us were not originally from the US, but how we came to the US and how we had a shift in culture and how different parts of those different buckets were impacted. We did touch on a few individual things, but to be perfectly honest, I think it's a total mix of everything, because it's so interconnected. It was very hard for us just to pull one. So I don't think all of us were focusing just on a physical or just on a spiritual. I just think that we all agree that there definitely was a lot of interconnectedness between them all.
Gunther, were you going to jump in there as well?
Sure. Actually, Rolf, I would defer to you here, because you brought up the perspective which I added to. So I would like to invite you to share your comments. I'm happy to jump in as well.
Well, I was just looking at, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just looking at the S.P.I.R.E model, the spiritual, the physical, the intellectual, the rational, and the emotional. And I, two things occur to me. One is that I feel like I've been seeing examples of innate well-being or the potential of human well-being in the videos that I've been seeing coming out of Ukraine in the last week. And here are people whose lives are threatened, who are some have lost their homes. I remember seeing stories of, a woman and her children who have been on trains for days trying to get out of the country. And the incredibly courageous president who they are in the most difficult situation that human beings can be in, and yet I see their well-being coming out of them. I saw an interview with a teenage boy the other day, 16 years old, who had decided to take on an automatic weapon. And he said it was the last thing that he wanted to do. There wasn't any, he felt like he had a moral compulsion to protect his home. And then on the other extreme, I'm thinking of my 3-year-old granddaughter. And I feel like I see the spiritual nature of her, the physical development, the intellectual curiosity, the ability to relate beautifully with people of all ages in almost a magical way, the beautiful expression of emotions, the ability to feel like the world is ending in one moment and be laughing a moment later. And I'm wondering if what's happening here when we come up with a mental or an intellectual model like the S.P.I.R.E model is that we're looking at this innate capacity that human beings have to experience well-being in any circumstance, completely uncontingent from any external reality. And as we study those people who exhibit that well-being, we see physical attributes, we see spiritual elements, we see relational elements, we see emotional elements, which are a way of thinking about it, kind of structuring our thinking around the notion of happiness. But what we're really doing is we're describing a deeper truth about the human capacity for well-being. And I think when I look at my granddaughter, I think that well-being is something that's innate in all of us, and that it's something that we're born with, and that we can't ever lose, because it's a spiritual essence of who we are as human beings.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of, Viktor Frankl's, amazing book, Man's Search for Meaning. There's it's how you respond,
I'd
Yeah,
love if I could
that's a
jump
beautiful
in,
example.
just to jump in here a little bit. It was interesting because I had jotted a few notes in our group, and I had made a note, an idea that just came into me that I called unconditional well-being. And Rolf used the term innate well-being, and I realized that we're really talking about the same thing. So from that perspective, any outcome, any goal, be it spiritual, intellectual, physical, emotional, or relational, are external attainments. And then once we're on that track, if you will, or one of those 5 tracks, we're still dependent on the external realization or the internalization of an external goal in order to feel happy, to feel well, to feel a sense of well-being. So there's a fundamental reality. You could call it spiritual. I don't even know if we need to name it, but my sense is, from my own life experience, that there's a fundamental reality here that really isn't dependent on any external realization, if you will, or in any external satisfaction. We're really talking from this perspective. We're talking about how desires arise, are temporarily satisfied, and then give rise to another desire. So it's basically a endless loop, and there's no way off of that except up and out, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Gunther. Other thoughts? Would love to hear some other perspectives.
I'll throw
JP, it's
something in.
Judy Cousin.
Hi, Judy.
Oh, do we have a couple starting at the same time, or shall I?
Go ahead, Judy.
jump
Why don't
in?
you take the mic?
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Well, I thought what was notable about our group was the focus on relational. And that really struck me. And Dan would probably laugh. Dan, at the beginning of COVID, I took that Coursera class, that other happiness class.
I know of the class.
And I did it with, the class. And you probably know then that they have a pre and post, a quantitative assessment tool.
Yes, I do.
And so I would tell you that I was very happy, and I took the pre-test, and the one area that was lower was relationships. And I was like, really? So I must be really quantitatively oriented, because I needed numbers presented to me to really get me to focus on relationships. And, so now this is really, opening up the kimono, if you will, because that's a pretty dark statement, but I was all around accomplishment. And so it was interesting. I decided then, and I shared with my group, I decided to focus on relationships. I won't get into the detail of how I did that now. My post-assessment test was happier, but I truly felt happier and felt more joy with that focus on relationships. And that's something I'm going to bring with me. And what I noticed, bring forward, what I noticed in our group is everything that brought people this real satisfaction was around relationships, be it with children who are terminally ill and their families, with veterans who are experiencing PTSD. We all had, I'm delivering meals through Meals on Wheels. We all had some relationship focus, which I thought was interesting, given that that was my task that I took with me from that other class. So really significant, that piece.
I really appreciate that comment. And you bring a number of things up that are really important, including the fact that these all relate to one another, right? As you point out, they will, for lack of a better term, bleed into one another, and you'll feel potentially more positive emotion when you invest in that relationship. Just as if you invest in positive emotions, you might be able to cultivate healthier relationships as well, because you're there to be able to do it. And the same with meaning and otherwise, right? Meaning and how they affect negative emotions. As I think you bring up, given that your score was higher, and was Rolf and Gunther were talking about too, there's really good research on folks who are embedded in war zones for minimum of 3 months. And this research is done on soldiers, special soldiers, Red Cross workers, Doctors Without Borders. And you mentioned PTSD. those soldiers who go into war zones, they do not have higher levels of positive emotion. But the ones who do have higher levels of meaning tend to have lower levels of PTSD and or experience what they call post-traumatic growth afterwards. So it's not like they're happy there, but it gives them the resources for other things as well. And it sounds like that's part of what you experienced. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Maybe one more comment, and then we got some interesting more content. So anyone else want to jump in?
I'll share. I was in a group with Justin Campbell and Seth Stewart, and Seth and I both mentioned spiritual as our top, which is interesting because Seth has a background. We both played football together in high school. Seth became a performance dancer, entertainer. So on Broadway, I played football in college and was a professional athlete in mixed martial arts. But spirituals was both of our hires. And then chatting with Justin, his business is really centered around, spiritual development and restorative wellness. And so that all kind of showed up. Justin has a background in sports as well. So it was just kind of interesting how our priorities have pivoted per se.
Yeah. Dan, when does this happen? What does the data say, the science say? Is this do we do this as a society? Is it always around some kind of how the world's going? I mean, what is moving? What's the moon for our tide, if you will? Is there any science around that?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different perspectives to look at it from, right? So for example, we can look at the last 10 years since the rise of social media, right? And that's had a massive effect, right, on people's sense of overwhelm, their relationships, their happiness, their sense of meaning. It's tended to erode it pretty considerably, right? So if you look at the trends in depression, anxiety, and even suicide, they're up between 3- and 5-fold, since the advent of social media. There are a lot of things that are happening, but part of it is social comparison. There's more social comparison now than there ever has been. So when you have that out there, it's clearly going to affect all of us, and it would affect us in different ways, but it's going to affect us. And I think to Gunther's point, there are so many factors around us. We might not even be thinking about that or realizing that's the case. According to McKinsey, change is happening 10 times faster and 300 times the scale. So it's created 3,000 times the impact of the Industrial Revolution. Our brains have not evolved at the same pace. So we're trying to keep up, and it's kind of impossible. So what's suffering as a result? And similarly, when things are going well, we can see that in social media and language used on social media, which I'll share in a second. So there is a feeling of better, greater well-being or lesser well-being, but it's going to affect everyone differently. In part, what's playing point for you. If you are, as Judy was saying, a high achiever, right? And the market crashes and everything goes wrong, it might impact you more than someone who was really all about, who would emphasize relationships, where they could turn to someone and go, at least I have my family here and I have my friends. So lots of different forces are going to impact the way we move. But yeah, as a culture, there are forces that there is a tide for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and look at that. Someone just asked this question, and age. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Craig. That's pretty timely.
Is he cheating?
He is cheating. Craig, you looking at my slides, man?
Our group just tended to talk about that. We had a similar kind of age group of the three of us. And so we found that over time, our priorities obviously change. Right. And I was curious what the data yields as it relates to that.
Well, you know what? You're in luck, my friend, because I have some data for you. Shall we?
Good.
Let's look at a little data. Now, let me frame this data by saying that one of the big challenges, as we've already talked about, to happiness is that it's not enough, right? To living a fulfilling life is that happiness is not enough. But even when we know what these aspects of S.P.I.R.E or another model of well-being like PERMA or the Gallup polling work on it is, or ICOPE from the University of Miami, really good stuff, good research. Things change, times change, we change. Dan Gilbert, who's one of my favorite psychologists, authors, researchers, he's taught psych at Harvard for the last 20 plus years. He as he says, beginning of every semester for Psych 101, 50% of what I'm going to teach you is wrong. I just don't know which 50% because it's science. Things change. But in his book, Stumbling on Happiness, his main premise is that, look, human beings are the only animals that think about the future, right? I'm not, discounting squirrels and nuts in winter, but think about a complex future. And the problem is we're really bad at it. And why are we bad at it? We're bad at it for two key reasons. One is because what we think we want in the future, I want to be CEO, I want to be a professional athlete, I want to be on Broadway. Just a couple of examples of folks I know are here. We get there and we're like, wait a second. I'm a CEO now. I have all this pressure. I'm working 3 times the time. I never see my family. I didn't anticipate this. I have a very good friend who's on Broadway. He's in Hamilton, and he's been really successful for the last 10 years. But there came a point where he's like, I haven't had dinner with my family in like 10 years because I have a show every night except for Sunday. Or on Monday. So that's not what we expect. But the other thing is we're not the same person. Right? The Brian who wants to be, let's say, a CEO, or the Judy who wants to be on Broadway, 10 years ago, they're different people 10 years down the line. They're like, I'm not that person I was. And so to your question, Craig, and in your request for the data, allow me to give you a little something here. Let's see. And share my screen. So the World Wellbeing Project is a project at the University of Pennsylvania. It's been operating for about 15 years. They collect language from social media to see what trends they can track for general well-being of a community. And they can slice it or dice it any way they want. They can look at the state of Wisconsin. They can look by gender. In this case, what I'm going to share with you is by age. That's why I was so glad you brought that up, because we're going to look at ages and how the priorities change. Now, the first one we're going to look at is high school. Now, given it's like 10 years ago, which is why you'll see the word Justin Bieber pop up. But this is what people really were talking about in high school about 10 years ago in a word cloud, right? They were talking about English and science and physics, and they were a little bored, but they were interested in relationships and kissing and prom, right? They're thinking about school and getting ready tomorrow. And this is what's important in college and homework and essays, right? This is what was the foundation for a lot of folks when it came to, let's say, just for lack of a better term right now, their S.P.I.R.E, the aspects of S.P.I.R.E. What do relationships mean here? What does meaning and purpose mean here? But if you jump to just a few years later when they're in college, things change, right? They change considerably. Let's see, sorry. Right, there it is, right? All of a sudden they're exhausted. They have insomnia. They can't sleep. They're sleep deprived. They're restless, right? They're working till all hours. They're doing a double shift. They have teachers and professors, and they kind of hope it's canceled. They're on campus. I have redacted the entire upper right corner because they have learned how to use foul language and they have used it proficiently, right? So, but these are their concerns now. They're studying, they have exams, and they're getting a little nervous about things, right? So now you have a very different foundation. And of course, how you see those elements of S.P.I.R.E, or again, however you want to shape elements of well-being, they're going to change. Now, for us, I don't know if there's anyone here from college, but when we get to our 20s, things start to change. We're still drinking, as evidenced by the top left corner, heavily. But we're doing interviews and we're applying for jobs and we're job hunting. We have a manager. We're looking for security. And in the bottom, we might be making dinner for our hubby or for our partner or for our, for whoever it is at home. When we're cooking lunch, we're making dinner. We're at work. We're starting to go to weddings, but we have a boss and we have businesses, right? We need a nap and we need a shower. So these are things we didn't necessarily consider in college. I don't remember napping or showering very much, but all of a sudden things change. And then you get into your 30s and now it changes again. And it's interesting. I would say, if I heard you correctly, it was exactly what, who was it who said it before? Your former professional athlete. I'm so sorry. Not Ryan.
Brian.
I think it's Brian.
Thank you. So now on the bottom, now we're talking about, well, on the left, prayers and God and spirituality and support. And then in the bottom, Thanksgiving and blessings and family. So here we have parents and we have kids. We have a wonderful life. Not always wonderful, but we're talking about these things for our daughters and our sons and our partners. So the way that we think through these things changes. Elements of well-being, because our foundations change. And it could be as drastic as what Rob was talking about with these folks who are suffering through the onslaught in Ukraine. But for most of us, it is the day-to-day. And a lot of times we don't even realize it. I think just past this slide is what we would traditionally call a midlife crisis, right? Because we've gotten to 40 and we're like, wait a second, I'm not 20 anymore. What just happened, right? And I'm not who I was. I don't have the same desires, but I'm still acting like I would have wanted them, let's say 10, 15, 20 years ago. Yes, with slight adjustments, but still we've habituated to things. So the way that we use or look at these aspects of the S.P.I.R.E model, they will change. And that's a really, really important thing to consider, right? As many of you are bringing up. So, you know, I had an interesting conversation, by the way, with Cody when we did the breakouts. And one of the things he asked was, look, is it a finite amount of stuff, right? Do we have a certain amount of water to put into each of these buckets, the S.P.I.R.E model? Is there any way to increase that capacity? And clearly we pull from one and put into the other. You know, again, not to go too heavy on Judy here, but as she said, you know, I used to be all about achievement, and I learned how important relationships are to me. So we do make that choice every day. You know, we might not make it as consciously as we like to think, but like, I know I am choosing to leave my family right now and spend X amount of hours at the office, 8, 10, 12 plus, whatever it might be. I'm not there. So I can look at it and go, oh, look at that. I'm not with my family. I'm not spending as much time with my friends. So that's something that's important. So we're actually pulling hours back and forth. One of the things that's interesting, I think, about a lot of the aspects of positive psychology is that each of these elements can give us almost more volume to add to those buckets. So for example, if we look at something like the physical, we think about sleep. There's a 2018 study of over 1,000 people between the ages of 22 and 60. And they found that people who slept for 7 to 8 hours a night were about 30% more productive than those who slept for 5 hours a night. So we're sitting there thinking, I'm going to sacrifice sleep for productivity. You're actually paying for it on the other end. Plus the fact is your willpower is probably lower due to lack of sleep, which is one of the outcomes. You're probably not as nice as a person or as a parent or as a kid or as whatever it is you are, right? So being able to invest in sleep is going to give you an advantage. We know that relationships, positive relationships, are one of the best ways to get through stress and anxiety. As we say in class, the fellow I teach with, who's one of my closest friends, he's an adolescent psychiatrist. And he says, you know, walking away from friends when you're under stress and anxiety is exactly like driving away from the hospital when your appendix are about to burst, right? If you invest in those things, like relationships, positive relationships, you're less likely to feel that stress and anxiety. You're more likely to enjoy the things that are going well, so on and so forth. So there's this bidirectional relationship where when we invest in certain aspects, as I mentioned with meaning, you might not be as happy, but you're less likely to suffer PTSD. Each of these elements have something here. So, you know, if we talk about engagement, we know that folks who are engaged, according to one study that comes to mind, when you apply a character strength, something that Gunther's going to talk about in the next session in April, we're about 50% more likely to achieve a goal. So just because we're applying something that we feel good about, because it makes us get into flow, doesn't make us less productive. It actually makes us more productive often, and allows us to enjoy, sort of, as we said, a greater volume to add to those buckets. So there are lots of different ways to see what's this dynamic, this complex working mechanism of S.P.I.R.E or well-being overall. And many of the aspects when we invest only serves to grow. Not always, because we take from one to put in the other, but if we invest in it the right way, it serves to grow the overall well from which we can pull, right?
Yeah.
Dan, as you mentioned, that's something I just thought was really cool. You use the terms, you know, volume, and talked about being engaged. And I think about, again, I'm trying to put the, you know, engineering mindset of some sort of mechanism around it so I can kind of understand how the levers and pulleys work. But when you started talking about volume, I thought about the expansion, right? As we energize a category, as we, in the case of sleep, right, energize our physicality that we may have built over years, where if we think about it like a volume, right, I can put, you know, heat into a gas and get an expansion of volume. So in this case, I might still have the same amount of material, right? And then I'm shifting between these buckets, but by energizing them and by elevating that space, then I can get that increased volume. I think that's a really interesting quality of how they can share dynamically.
I love that metaphor. I think you're spot on there, Cody. It's perfect. It's exactly it. It's exactly it. I know that we want to do another breakout and talk about sort of what we can do to move forward. So what I'd love to do is let me share my screen with you one more time before we get there, because I want to give you some tangible actions to take, all of which are empirically sound. We have really solid research on all of them, and by the way, none of which, other than one which takes 6, but none of which should take more than 5 minutes because of your day. Because we know people are busy, and it's not like we're going to come in and say, hey, if you just do this for 3 hours a day, everything's going to be great. It's super unreasonable. So here are a number of things that I want you to think about before we go into that breakout. And in that breakout, we're going to ask you how you can keep applying this in your life. When it comes to the emotional, and Judy, clearly you know this one. You've been through the class. A lot of folks here, I imagine, know the idea of gratitude, of a gratitude journal. But I like to modify these things because I think the times demand it. A gratitude journal is very simple. You write down every night, you write down 3 things you're grateful for and why, not just for my partner, for my dog, for my roof, but why? Why today? Why specifically? It's not that we're necessarily creating things that aren't there. What we're doing is we're starting to see the world very differently. We're rewiring our brain. As we go through our day, some of us, especially these days, and the client that I had that I referred to before from Carnegie, couldn't find anything. He was like, I can't find anything. He paced for 15 minutes in front of his door because he couldn't walk in without them. The deal we had was that he would do it with his wife verbally, and he couldn't figure it out. But as the weeks went on, he'd find something and then he'd share it with her. And he said it got easier. He would notice things that were good that he wouldn't have given any weight to before, and they're there. And by the end of this month, and we found in the research, we start to see a lot more that we're grateful for. Not that everything's wonderful, but that it's there. I recommend something like a resilience a journal, or any journal that you're writing 3 things and why that you think you need. If you need resilience right now, how are 3 ways that I showed resilience today? Even little ways. And why was that important? Because you're starting to, again, rewire your brain in a way where you're seeing the things that are actually around you, not because you're just making them up. Now, just breathing. I know that Gunther's probably going to talk about this next time as well. This relates to mindfulness. This is essentially meditation. Now, we're all just breathing, but deep belly breaths, right? Twice a day, 3 minutes each time. A lot of this comes from a ton of research. JP and I talked about Michael Boehm at UPenn, who's doing remarkable stuff in meditation. But as little as 6 minutes a day of deep, focused breathing not only tends to raise our levels of overall well-being and emotion, but it tends to help us with stress and deal with the negative emotions that a lot of folks are feeling. So if this is that area where you're thinking, I could use a little in the bucket, this is a way to think about it. Now, relational, there are different ways to do it. And I know we're kind of zipping through these. I'm so happy to talk about them more later or offline. 3 quick notes in the morning. Thanking people or acknowledging something they did. Can be a sticky note, can be a text, can be an email. That tends to raise levels of collegiality in the office, warmth, trust among friends, one check-in call, 5-minute call. Even if someone is not open to talking about what's going on, they know someone's there, and it increases bonds as well. Asking for help. We've looked at firefighters, we've looked at soldiers, we've looked at emergency medical technicians, we've looked at oil rig workers, the big macho field, right? When they ask for help, acknowledge they don't know something, they tend to have better relationships, also fewer injuries and overall well-being. So being able to be, look, the other world is vulnerable, which is major, and Brene Brown has talked about it a lot. When we do this, we actually get some really kind of outsized returns in a way. Character strengths. So character strengths are huge. And I'm bringing up VIA character, which is it's an assessment that has loads of research over the last 25 years. And these are character strengths such as love and kindness, bravery and humor. And we find that when we use them at work, our odds of being engaged in the workplace rises from 9% when we don't use them to about 73% when we do. It also, as I mentioned, helps us realize greater goals, right? And we use them in a new way every day, right? If mine is appreciation of beauty and mastery, I make sure I look at a beautiful painting, I read a beautiful poem, I watch a sunset, or I watch an amazing athlete, which totally fires me up because it falls into the category. Our overall well-being goes up. By the way, Gunther's going to share an assessment before the next session. Where you'll have a chance to take his new assessment, or I shouldn't say new, but his modified assessment with the ABI, which I think goes even deeper than via character. But this is a free website you can check out. You can take it, see what it's like for you, find one. I suggest you share it with people around you to get a sense of how it's showing up in your life and your blind spots. But you will have that queued up, and Gunther's going to email it to everybody, or Emily will send it to everyone. You can take the assessment, and it's closely related, but I think it goes even deeper. And make time for outside interests, hobbies, things like that. That is how we develop passions, not by a thunderbolt moment where it's like, bam, that's my passion. It tends to be, I'm interested in this. I'm not going to dive full in, but maybe I'll take one class in that and move forward. So making that time is important. And finally, the spiritual aspect. And this is really key. This is a study from Angela Duckworth and Adam Grant, my colleagues at UPenn. They asked folks like firefighters and teachers and oh, what's the other? Can't remember off the top of my head. Factory workers. How does the work that I do help other people? When people think about this question and share it with others in the workplace, in the firehouse, the schoolhouse, well, how does the work they do help make the world a better place? When we journal about it, if that's what we prefer, or talk about it at our dinner table, our levels of meaning tend to rise. So being able to simply share this question with others and have this conversation, one that we might find we have in about 30 seconds, can be immensely helpful to our levels of meaning in our life. And as we talked about, especially during challenging times, like right now, it can be really useful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into this breakout. And instead of 15 minutes, we should take 10, if that's cool with you, JP. And we want you to think about your family unit, your employees, your teams, which aspect aspire. And again, some people said there were many, so feel free to riff on that. But which one or ones do you most look forward to sharing with people around you? You know, the one thing I say to audiences all the time is, if I could give you one assignment, be to take today, pick one thing and teach it at your dinner table, because that's how we tend to learn it best. So what are you going to do? How are you going to share it? Are you going to share it tonight at dinner if you're on the West Coast? Are you going to bring it back to the office tomorrow? What are you going to do in the days ahead? So can we take 10 on that one before we come back to the conversation?
That sounds great. And we're so when we come back, we'll do rapid fire answers. We'll just have people come in with a kind of a quick, here's what came up for me. So take a note on what really hits you biggest during this time. First, thank you for going full send today in this amazing topic, and Dan, for everything.
My pleasure.
So rapid fire, we'll have to hear. Maybe you can either raise your hand or put your hand up, or if your mic's off, it looks like most everyone's is. What came up?
I think everybody in our group was really focusing on the relationships, either how we needed to expand or contract.
Oh, wow. Great. Someone else?
Well, we discussed relationship and also that these things meld into everybody. But I guess I was the outlier. I brought up at some point in time, you have to really focus on the physical. And if I had to do something tomorrow, I'd say, if you want to do relationship and spiritual and emotional, make sure you're okay physically so you can get around and do all those things.
We found that it's about balance at the end of the day. You can't just focus on one thing, whether it's one of these buckets or something else. It's you're balancing a life.
Yeah, thanks, Brock.
And I think making a focused effort, like Dan said, of whether it's verbal or taking 2 minutes to write something down, like actually doing that to put that kind of focus is something that takes a little bit of effort, and I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, the doing part. Great.
So this is interesting. In our group, I feel like what came naturally to all of us was the needs of everybody else around us. That we were more like plugged into the people we work with, the people we love and adore, and like what those people need. And so that's what we were giving. And they weren't all the same. Like one was intellectual, one was relation, like they were all over the board, but it was nowhere about us first with everybody else. It's interesting that group ended up together.
One or two more.
I really like the elegant simplicity of these things that we can all do to add meaning in our lives in really simple ways.
It doesn't take exponential technology, does it?
Right.
It's another thing, JP, which came up. Sorry, Cody, you want to go for it? Yeah, so I think another thing which came up is that, do what works for you. you don't have to do it all if you can't balance it all. Just basically take what works for you. And if it's only a few things, it's going to make you better. So just take that little sip versus trying to wrap your arms around it. Bit by bit, we get better. We don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah, and let me just comment on that, Greg. I really appreciate you saying that. What I always say, and I didn't say today, was not everything here will work for everybody. There's no way. That's the one promise I'll make for you today, is that some people are going to be like, meditation, I tried it, not my thing. But you know what? In 10 years, it might. But right now, you might need something else. So you find a few things that do work, and you tweak them a little bit. Like you said, maybe it's 2 instead of 3 minutes. You find what works for you in the way that it works for you. I think that's essential. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, and the other thing I think about, Dan, here is that as we're thinking about this, of course, we think about the individual, and then we think about our close units, our family, our teams, our cohorts. And that's really what we're talking about here. This human, well-being is that sort of scale that goes in and out. And I think this S.P.I.R.E model, I'm really interested to dig in a little bit more and experience it myself, because that's what I want to do. I want to build this framework where we can have this for not just myself, but how do we teach it across and allow for the entire community or the ecosystem to really have that sort of understanding, the language to be able to go after it.
Yeah, the point I wanted to highlight with those things, and I think it synchronizes with each of what you all just said, is just that I keep hearing the focus, right? The talk about the attention that we have to put towards these things. And we talk about them in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, right? They grow, but really our attention is that resource, right? That time that we can control a little bit, that we can kind of harness. And if we're not, then the world is harnessing it for us, right? It's looking to give us a bunch of requisite information, a bunch of rewards and punishments, a bunch of advertisements and otherwise behavioral modifiers to really try and tell us what we should be chasing after. And really what I've heard from everyone, right, is when you get in there by yourself and adjust those gain values, right, it will take time to control the depth of investment in each of those areas. That's where we're getting that response, right? And I think that's really amazing. So for me, at least coming out of this, I'm really trying to ask myself, how do I harness that attention, right? How do I start to really be the one who's on the ones and twos, right, in my life, instead of letting somebody else DJ it for me?
Yeah, not Google anymore. Well, I'm going to, I got to be the person to keep the moving parts here, because we're nearing our time. And before we say goodbye, because we're not done yet, there's a couple more things, but we'll go through this pretty quick. First of all, if you want to get in touch, of course, at Black Lab, you can reach out to Emily. If you miss somebody, you want to connect somebody that you met in a breakout, reach out to Emily. If you have any suggestions about future events or speakers or how this went for you, we'd love to hear from you. Dan's information is up there as well. Reach out to Dan. He loves working with groups, your company, your cohort, your university, whatever it is. And so he's got some amazing stuff, new book coming out pretty soon here. So some really, really fun stuff. So make sure to stay in touch with Dan. And I'm really excited to I want you to think about this as a series, because our next forum is actually next month. It's going to be on the 13th of April. We have another QR code, so you can scan that right now if you'd like to register. Gunther Wild's going to be leading us through it. And just to give you a quick understanding, I've known Gunther now probably for 4 years, I think, Gunther. He came into my life and really taught me. I mean, he really was able to teach me a lot about, even kind of this idea of consciousness, and now we're putting into kind of conscious capitalism. He helped me think about meditation. He helped me think about a lot of different areas. But one of the areas that he really fundamentally came prepared with was this work, this 30 years of work around values. And I took his original assessment, really intrigued me. We're going to be using a new version, as Dan talked about. It's called the KVI, which is the Key Values Inventory. It's an assessment so that you can understand for yourself, and hopefully not just you, but then your team, your family, your employees, your cohort, to understand what are the key values of those individuals. And it's a tool that will help you really understand the worldviews of people. So nobody thinks this, see the world the same. It could be the same thing. That's blue, that's blue, right? But that's really not that blue. Your blue and my blue are different. As an example, what you'll get out of it, this is actually my top 10 values. Thanks, Emily, for putting this up here. So There's a surprise there. Now you know about me. No, but these are my values. So instead of taking the values that you think you were taught to have, or society might suggest you have, this assessment kind of forces you into actually finding out your true values. And then that's really informative. You can understand that from your own point of view. So we think about this as a foundational piece as you start to think about even the S.P.I.R.E model or your core purpose in life. This is kind of the foundational piece of understanding that self-knowledge, know thyself. So with that, so please sign up. We'd love to continue. We'd love for you to be there. We're super excited about it. We're kind of stringing these things together and see how that all kind of brings together human, well-being. This, if you didn't sign up for your wallet early with Vadim, make sure you click on that now, put in your phone number, hit send magic code, log in. The next page, you're gonna get another NFT. You guys ready? All right. Dan, what do you think? You got your first official NFT. You're getting it?
I'm muted. I'm sorry. I was dumbfounded. That's what it was. That I would be an NFT. I can't promise much value on this, but
no, there's only 100 of these out there ever. So if you download one of these and you put it in your wallet, you only have one of 100. And eventually, as Dan goes to the rockets to the moon, who knows? You might be able to mint it and resell it as a collectible. But
you know what I just realized, JP? I got to share this with you. So this picture was taken by one of my best friends in the world. His name is Jonathan Mannion, and John is the foremost hip hop photographer in the world. And I was like, dude, I need a headshot. And he's like, just come to the apartment. So he shot this. So actually, you now have a Mannion. Now, don't tell him I told you this, because he'll probably he'll be totally cool with it. But this is actually a guy who shot Jay-Z's first 7 album covers. So congratulations, you now own a Lerner and a Mannion.
Well, there you go, everybody. See how this works? So by the way, if you don't know what this world is around NFTs, or you've heard about it, this is another topic we'll talk about kind of in the community and ecosystem side of the conversation, probably later this summer. But also, last announcement I'll just say is that we're working, it's not announced yet, but early indication is that, Cody, can I spoil it a little bit? We're trying to put together a summer summit in person again. In this one, we've been talking, Cody's been really leading this charge, but we're thinking about the topic of deep space and what it means for humans to evolve into being a cosmic species. It's gonna be a fascinating group of people coming together. So anyway, keep an eye on that. We don't have a save the date yet, but we're working hard to see if we can pull that together. So Dan, thank you so much.
And it's such a pleasure. Seriously, I thank you all for being here, sticking around and coming, for these hours and bringing so much wonderful conversation and input and insight to all this. It's an honor. So thank you for joining and for having me.
Yeah, and so that's the end of it. So anyway, everybody, thank you so much for being here. You can hang out for a few more minutes. My birthday's tomorrow, so if you want to hang out and chat for a few minutes,
birthday.
Otherwise,
Happy birthday, young fella.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Hey, thanks so much for being here. Have a great evening.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.